Greetings. For this video, I'd like to discuss mixed methods. And even though it is a formal chapter in your textbook and there is a PowerPoint that goes along with the chapter, I'm not going to use either for this particular video. Just wanted to mention a few things. First, I think mixing it up is really helpful. That you really are getting the best opportunities to use the tools of research to answer your questions. The whole idea there's not one best way to answer a question would apply here, because you can answer usually part of a question with one research method, but then you need another research method to answer other parts. And so I think combining qualitative and quantitative methods is extremely useful. The example that I provided when I discussed evaluation research was when we were evaluating our program, and we found that after 16 weeks comparing pre and post tests, that the clients were didn't really make any significant improvements. Their kids improved, but the clients themselves, and that was the focus of the group, did not. So something was going on, and we found out that many of the participants believed that 16 weeks was just too short a period, and they wished that the group would run longer. One of the things that we did, and that was about the time I left the agency to go on to work on my doctorate, was make the group open-ended so that people could stay as long as they really needed to, and that may be a whole nother way to that would lead to a new evaluation to find out what if 25 weeks really work better than 16. So we always have to question our results. These are some books that I've used before in different research studies. And a lot of times we're really used to looking at data, pulling in a large data set and analyzing that. And that's really probably that's probably normal science in criminal justice, that you see analyzing large data sets with statistical procedures. But I also wanted to point out there's just so much qualitative, rich material out there to use. In my own research on genocide perpetrators and in my genocide grad course, I use Machete Season, The Killers in Rwanda Speak, by a journalist, Jean Hatzfeld, and he interviewed about a dozen prisoners in a Rwandan prison who had participated in the genocide and killed people, and he asked them about their experiences, their beliefs, their understandings, what got them to that point, what they see as the future, and so on. This is an interesting book that I read in a local book club, The Devil in the Grove, by Gilbert King. And this is very interesting because this is actually relates to cases from Groveland, Florida. And I'll have to admit that before I read this fascinating book, I never had heard of Groveland, Florida. But now I found this history to be very relevant, looking at criminal justice issues as well as other issues related to society. This is an interesting book as well, really neat book, Defiance by Professor Tech, who wrote about basically the groups that were in the forest during the Holocaust that tried to help people and to prevent the Nazis from gaining power. And one of the interesting features is that this became a major motion picture starring Daniel Craig, who is on the cover of the book. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning is probably one of the classic books in psychotherapy and also in Holocaust and genocide studies. It's listed under psychology, but I think you could list this in many different disciplines, which leads me to the point that often using interdisciplinary research and pulling in methods that are used primarily in other fields may be very helpful as well. We all share the same methods, but we might find, for example, an anthropological approach, a theory, and methods that are used commonly in anthropology may be very, very useful. And this book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, especially the first part, details his observations as a psychiatrist and as a prisoner in a concentration camp during the Holocaust. This book by Ishmael Bia, um, this book here, A Long Way Gone, basically tells the experiences of, or it's a memoir of a boy soldier. And so this really is a fascinating study and very, very important in looking at the socialization process and how people become violent. And then Arlene Stein's Reluctant Witnesses, Survivors, Their Children, and the Rise of the Holocaust Consciousness. She interviews second generation and third generation Holocaust children that had parents that survived the Holocaust. And then, of course, you all probably know one of my favorites, Violent Criminal Acts and Actors, Revisited by Lonnie Athens, where he develops and advances violentisation theory. And really, the theory is derived from his intensive interviews with violent inmates and violent people who are not in prison, and well as his observations over the life course. And then you can combine a lot of this with statistical analysis. For example, we may find out that there are several cities, and we can do a large-scale analysis and find out the crime rates, the types of crimes, who's most likely to be a victim, and a whole bunch of other relevant demographic factors. And we may find that that things look pretty much the same demographically and in a whole bunch of other dimensions, but then the crime rates vary. So we may need to actually go into those communities and conduct systematic observations and intensive interviews to find out how we can explain those differences. So mixed methods really are important and relevant. And we have some articles, of course, that will be posted in your web course that you can take a look at. But I really think it's such a good opportunity to use all these different methods we have, especially when we get more methods that can be applied to large-scale data sets that are available. And then we can do intensive small-scale studies as well and kind of piece them together. I'll just give you one more example, and then I'll wrap up this this video. But when I first started studying genocide back around 2001, the first study really I conducted was statistical in nature, and I looked at some of the major genocides of the 20th and 21st centuries, and what I did is I analyzed things like the percentage of civilians that were killed, the number of deaths, the types of weapons used, the types of communication, whether or not support from other countries was present or not, and so on. And I did a correlational analysis to look at what factors were related. The second study I completed really focused more on looking at perpetrator interviews from a variety of sources, including court documents and journalistic interviews and other research sources, and then started looking at perpetrator narratives and how they made sense of their own behavior, as well as witness accounts of the perpetrators. And so I took a very different route there, although there were some similar themes that ran throughout my studies, and that was looking at the cohesiveness of the perpetrator groups and the importance of the group behavior and group think, and how groups materialize to move into a very violent direction. So combining methods really offers you a way to strengthen your research and answer your criminal justice related questions. Thank you.